The long-necked bottle slipped out of the old man's hand and shattered on the deck boards, and just like that, 40 people stopped talking at the same time. Not slowly, all at once. 1 second, my cousin Kurt was leaning back in a folding chair, laughing so hard his face had gone red. A paper plate of pulled pork balanced on his knee. The next second, there was glass and beer foam spreading across the wood, and a retired Navy SEAL was standing at the far end of my brother's deck, staring at me like the ground had just opened up under him. I'd said one word. That was all. One word, quiet, almost under my breath, because Kurt had pushed and pushed the way he always did, and I was tired of being small. Lighthouse. The old SEAL's name was Tom Garrett. I didn't know him. He'd only just married into the family that spring. But when that word left my mouth, he went the color of paper. His jaw worked like he was trying to speak and couldn't find the air for it. "No," he finally said. Just that. No. Then, the 70-something man, who'd been quietly nursing a beer in the corner all afternoon, set down what was left in his other hand, straightened his spine like somebody had pulled a string through the top of his head, and saluted me. Slow and steady, the way you do for something that earned it. Over a plate of barbecue, with the brisket smoke still hanging in the air. And for the first time in my whole life, my cousin Kurt had absolutely nothing to say. Let me back up, because none of this is the kind of thing you can understand from the middle. It was supposed to be an easy Saturday. My brother Dale was retiring after 31 years at the paper mill outside Maryville, and his wife Brenda had decided that called for a cookout. Nothing fancy. Folding tables on the back deck, coolers full of ice and soda, a smoker going since 5 in the morning, kids running barefoot through the grass with sticky hands. East Tennessee in late summer. The mountains went blue and soft in the distance, and the cicadas were so loud you had to lean in close to hear anybody talk. I almost didn't go. I hadn't been to one of these things in about 6 years. My family is good people mostly, but families keep records, and they keep them in pencil they never erase. In our family, I was the odd one, the quiet one, the aunt who lived alone out past Maryville with her bees and her garden and her old pickup, who didn't have a husband or kids, who'd gone off into the military young and come back wrong somehow and never explained it. That was the story they'd settled on about me a long time ago. Most of them figured I'd done something forgettable in the service. Pushed paper, answered phones on some base in a state nobody visits, filed things. I never corrected them. Easier that way. When you let people believe a small thing about you, they stop digging for the big one. I'm 56 now. You learn things at 56 that nobody can teach you at 26. The main one is this: being left alone is worth more than being understood. I'd made my peace with the small story. I'd built a whole quiet life inside it. But Dale had called me himself, not Brenda, Dale. "Die," he said, and his voice did that thing it does when he's trying not to sound soft. "I'm done at the mill. 31 years and I'm done. I'd like my sister there when they hand me the watch." So I drove the hour and change. I brought a blackberry cobbler I'd made that morning, and I told myself I'd stay until the cake and then slip out before anyone got drunk enough to get mean. I should have known Kurt would get a head start on the mean. My cousin Kurt Maddox is loud the way some men are loud, which is to say he's loud because somewhere underneath all of it, he's scared to death of being small. He owns a string of self-storage places up around Knoxville, and he never once lets you forget it. Talks about his boat, talks about his trucks, treats every conversation like it's a sale he's about to close. He's not evil, I want to be fair about that. He's just a man who confused volume for worth a long time ago and never figured out the difference. By the time I got there around 2, he was already 3 beers in and holding court by the smoker. "Well, look what the cat finally dragged back into the family," he called out when he saw me. A couple of folks laughed. "We thought you joined a convent." "Still ornery, Kurt?" I said. "Always, baby, always." I hugged Dale. I kissed Brenda on the cheek. I carried trays from the kitchen to the deck while the men argued about football and gas prices and the women fussed over the babies. Nobody paid me much attention. I liked it that way. Invisible is a place I know how to live. Around 3, a silver truck I didn't recognize pulled up the gravel drive, and out stepped an older man in a clean blue button-down, sleeves rolled to the elbow, white hair cut close, tall, lean, moved careful, like his knees had opinions, but with a kind of stillness in him that I clocked before I clocked anything else. I knew that stillness. You don't lose it. Old soldiers carry it into nursing homes. It's in the way they sit with their back to the wall and watch the doors. "Everybody, this is Tom," Brenda announced, beaming. "Hannah's father-in-law. Drove all the way down from over near Bristol." Hannah was Dale's youngest, married the year before. So Tom was brand new to all of us. He went around the deck shaking hands, polite, easy, a man used to making people comfortable. And when he got to me, something flickered behind his eyes for half a second. Like a man who hears a song he hasn't heard in 20 years and can't place where. I looked away first. I always look away first. I should have left right then. By 5, Kurt had moved from loud to insufferable. He'd gathered a little crowd by the cooler and was telling them about the time he almost went pro in baseball, a story that grows an inch every year I've heard it. The light was getting long and gold across Dale's backfield, and I'd found a quiet spot by the deck railing, just watching the mountains go dark, when Kurt wandered over with a fresh beer and that grin that means trouble is coming. "Hey, so," he leaned on the rail next to me. "You ever actually do anything over there? In the service?" "Sometimes," I said. "Sometimes." He chuckled and looked back at his little audience. "What's that mean, sometimes? You shoot a gun?" "On occasion." "On occasion?" He was loving this. The others had drifted closer. "Di here was in the Air Force, everybody. What'd you do, count the planes?" A couple of the younger cousins laughed. I felt Tom Garrett go still across the deck. I could feel him watching, the way you feel a draft from an open door. I should have shut it down. I've shut down 1,000 conversations like it. But I was tired. Tired in a way that goes past one long afternoon. Tired of being the small story for 6 years and 20 years before that. So I answered him honest, just to see his face. "I called in airstrikes," I said. "Mostly at night. Mostly when something had already gone bad." That landed wrong for him, because it didn't sound like a joke, and Kurt only knows how to live inside jokes. He blinked, recovered, doubled down. "Sure you did." He turned to the crowd, doing the bit now. "Let me guess. Big tough commando lady. They probably had some cute little nickname for you, huh? What'd they call you? Sergeant Sunshine?" The crowd laughed. He grinned wide, pleased with himself. I looked him dead in the eye. "Lighthouse," I said. And that's where the bottle hit the deck. Nobody moved for what felt like a full minute after Tom Garrett saluted me. Even Kurt. And getting Kurt Maddox to shut his mouth is the kind of thing you'd normally need a court order for. The cicadas were still screaming out in the trees. Somewhere down the road a screen door banged. Ordinary sounds, going on like nothing in the world had changed, while my whole family stared at me like I'd grown a second head. I hated it. I have always hated it. People think the moment somebody finds out who you used to be is satisfying, like in the movies, the big swell of music, the slow turn. It isn't. Mostly it just makes me tired and a little sick to my stomach. I'd spent 20 years building the quiet, and a quiet like that is hard work. You don't get it back once it cracks. Tom lowered his hand slow. His eyes were wet at the edges, and he didn't seem to care who saw. Kurt forced out a laugh, the nervous kind. "Okay," he said, looking around. "Somebody want to tell me what just happened?" Tom didn't answer him right away. He kept looking at me, and there was 20 years of something in his face. Finally, he turned to Kurt. "You got any idea," he said, "who you've been talking to?" Kurt's grin had gone thin. "I mean, my cousin Di, lives out by herself, keeps bees." Tom nodded slow. "Keeps bees," he repeated. "Sure." Brenda set down the tray she was holding. "Dee," she said carefully, What's he mean? I sighed and leaned back against the rail. Nothing worth this much fuss. That's not true, ma'am. Tom said it gentle but firm, the way you correct a thing that matters. With respect, that's about as far from true as it gets. Every face on that deck was pointed at me now. The kids had stopped running. Even the football argument by the smoker had died. I could practically watch them all flipping back through years of cookouts, holidays, funerals, replaying every assumption they'd ever made about the strange, quiet woman who never said much. Funny how people build whole books about you out of your silence. They fill in every blank, and they never once ask if they got it right. Tom pulled a chair over and sat down across from me, slow, his knees cracking. You really vanished, he said quietly, almost to himself. We talked about you like you were a ghost story. Some of the boys, they were sure you were dead. That was the idea, I said. Vanishing, I mean, not the dead part. He laughed at that, just a short breath through his nose. Then it faded. Kurt was still standing there with his empty hands. Will somebody, he said louder than he needed to, please explain to me what a lighthouse is? Tom looked up at him. You know what a call sign is? Like a code name, sort of. Tom rubbed his thumb across the back of his other hand, the way old men do when they're choosing words. Most call signs are nothing. A joke. Some dumb thing you did one time that stuck. You get named for snoring, or for a bad haircut, or for getting your boot stuck in the mud. He pointed at me, easy, with 2 fingers. And then once in a while you get one that means something. One the whole community knows. One that men say out loud when they're praying. Kurt looked at me, looked back at Tom. You're being dramatic, old-timer. Tom's face didn't change, but his voice dropped about 10 degrees. Son, he said, there are men alive right now, walking around holding their grandkids because of the voice that came out of that radio. I'm one of them. The deck went quiet in a different way after that. The kind of quiet where people stop being entertained and start being afraid of what they don't know. Brenda sat down next to me and took my hand without asking. Honey, she said, what did you do over there? I looked down at my hands for a while. At 56, your hands tell more truth than your mouth does. There's a burn scar across 2 of my knuckles I've never explained to anyone in this family. There's a finger that doesn't bend all the way. I was a combat controller, I said. Air Force. Special tactics. They put people like me out on the ground with the teams. SEALs, Rangers, whoever was going somewhere ugly. My job was the sky. If we needed planes, gunships, anything with a bomb or a gun on it, I was the one on the radio who told them where to put it. And who to keep it off of. Tom shook his head, but it was a correcting kind of shake. Don't make it small. That's the cleaned-up version. He looked around at the family. What she's not telling you is that the controller is the one who stands up in the worst part of the worst night and talks the whole thing down out of the dark while everybody around her is getting shot at. You make one wrong number, one wrong word on that radio, and you don't kill the enemy. You kill your own. Hannah, sitting near the door, said softly, This sounds like a movie. No, I said, maybe sharper than I meant. Movies end. That hung there in the warm air. Dale, my brother, who'd been standing the whole time with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, finally spoke. Where, Di? He said. Where were you when this happened? I closed my eyes for a second. I could feel it coming up out of me, whether I wanted it to or not. Some things you bury, and they stay buried, and some things you only think you buried, and they've been sitting an inch under the dirt the whole time, waiting for somebody to say the right word. Afghanistan, I said. East, up in the mountains, spring of '06. Tom went very still. The valley, he said. I nodded. Tell them, he said, and his voice cracked on it just a little. Please, I never got to hear it from your side. So I did. God help me, I told them. It was supposed to be a quiet one. That's the thing nobody believes. The bad ones almost always start out as the quiet ones. A small SEAL recon element had gone up into the high ground to watch a trail for a few days. In and out. I was attached to a second team that was supposed to sit in a blocking position lower down. Routine, as much as anything is routine up there. The kind of mission you do 100 times and nothing happens. Then the weather turned. Up in those mountains, the weather doesn't roll in, it drops on you, like somebody pulling a wet wool blanket down over the whole valley. Clouds came in under the ridgelines. And the thing about clouds under the ridgelines is that they take your airplanes away. The fast movers can't see. The gunships can't get a clean look. The whole sky, the one thing that's supposed to be ours, just closes its eyes. And of course that's exactly when the recon team got hit. They walked into it, I said. Somebody had been watching them the whole time. The enemy let them get all the way up, all the way exposed, and then opened up from 3 sides at once. First call I got, 2 men were already down. Bad. Brenda's hand tightened on mine. The plan was for air support to come in and break it up so the team could get off that mountain. But the weather had the planes grounded out at the field, and the ones that were up couldn't see through the cloud to do any good. I could hear myself getting flatter, the way I get when the memory is too sharp to feel and talk at the same time. And then Command made a call. What call? Dale said. They called it off. I looked at him. There was a colonel running the whole operation from the rear. He looked at the weather, looked at how many guns the enemy had brought, and he made the math call. He ordered everybody to pull back to the blocking position and hold, including the birds that were trying to get up the valley to those men. He left them, Tom said, low and hard. He left my team on that mountain. The family was dead silent now. Even the babies had gone quiet, the way little ones do when they feel the grown-ups go cold. I had the recon team on one radio, I said. I had the colonel on another, and on the team's radio I could hear it, the shooting, and one of the boys, his voice, asking me, over and over, "Are they coming? Lighthouse, are they coming? Tell me somebody's coming." I had to stop for a second. And the order was to tell him no. Kurt, who had not made a single joke in 20 minutes, said quietly, "What did you do?" I looked at him. Kurt, in his golf shirt, with his storage units and his bass boat. And I told him the truth, which is the simplest answer I've ever given. I lied to the colonel, I said. I told him my radio was breaking up. I told him I'd lost the link. And then I got on the net with every aircraft I could still reach, and I started bringing them up the valley myself. You have to understand what that means. With the weather that low, those pilots could not see the ground. They were flying blind into mountains in the dark. The only thing standing between a friendly bomb and a friendly head was me, on the radio, with a map in my head and the team's position memorized down to the rock, talking each one in by feel. "Danger close," I said, because there's no other word for it. Every call I made that night was danger close. That means the bombs are landing close enough to your own people to kill them if you get it wrong. You don't do it unless there's no other way left. There was no other way left. "How long?" Tom asked. He already knew. He just needed me to say it. 4 hours, I said. Maybe a little more. I talked gun runs in all night. I walked a medevac up that valley in 0 visibility, told the pilot every turn, every ridge, because he couldn't see his own rotor tips. And we got them. Not all of them. My voice did something I didn't give it permission to do. We lost 2, the 2 who were hit at the start, but the rest of them came home. 11 men came down off that mountain who were already written off as gone. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then Hannah, very quietly, asked the question I'd been dreading. "Why'd they call you Lighthouse?" And it was Tom who answered because I couldn't. "Because that's what she was," he said. His voice was thick now and he didn't fight it. "You're up there in the black, in the storm, and you can't see your own hand, and you are sure, you are dead sure, that you are going to die alone on that rock, and nobody will ever even find you. And then there's this voice, calm, just calm, telling you exactly where to go. telling you to hold on, telling you the way home." He wiped his face with the back of his hand and didn't apologize for it. "A lighthouse doesn't come out to the ship. It can't. It just stays where it is and refuses to go dark so you can find your own way in. That's what she was for us. That's what she was for me." You could have heard a pin drop on Dale's deck. Kurt was looking at the floor. I picked up my sweet tea just to have something to do with my hands, and then Tom looked at me, and his face changed. The wet pride drained out of it, and something else came in. Worry. Real worry. "Di," he said slow, "if all that's true, and I know it's true, I was there, then how in God's name did you end up out here keeping bees and not being talked about? Why'd you disappear?" And there it was, the actual question, the one underneath all the others, the one I'd spent 20 years driving away from on back roads. Because the valley wasn't why I vanished. What happened after the valley is why I vanished. The air on the deck had changed. Even the breeze coming off the mountains seemed to slow up and wait. I set my tea down. "Because saving those men," I said, "turned out to be the worst thing I ever did for myself." Dale frowned. "How do you figure?" I took a breath. "When I lied to the colonel about my radio and brought those aircraft up the valley against his order, I saved 11 men. I also made one man look bad, and it turned out the second thing mattered more than the first." "The colonel," Tom said. "The colonel," I agreed. I told them his name, though it didn't mean a thing to them yet. Vance. Colonel Gerald Vance, the man who'd done the math and decided 11 men were an acceptable loss against bad weather and a few enemy guns. "When we got everybody down," I said, "there should have been an end to it. 2 men dead, but 11 home who shouldn't have been. By any decent measure, that's a night you're proud of. The teams knew what happened. They knew who kept talking when the order was to go quiet. For about a week, I was the most popular airman in that whole valley." "So what went wrong?" Brenda asked. "2 men died," I said simply. "And when men die, somebody upstairs has to write a report. And that report decides whose fault it was. And Colonel Vance was not about to write a report that said the deaths happened because he pulled support off a pinned team against the advice of the people on the ground. That's the kind of report that ends a career. He had bigger plans than that. Everybody knew Vance was going places." I rubbed the scar on my knuckles without meaning to. "So he wrote a different report. He wrote that the operation fell apart because an airman on the ground panicked, disobeyed a lawful withdrawal order, and called in a string of reckless, danger-close strikes that endangered the entire force. He wrote that those 2 men might have lived if not for the chaos that airman created." I looked up. "That airman was me." "That's a lie," Tom said, and he said it like it physically hurt him. "That is a flat lie. I'll swear it on anything you put in front of me. Those strikes are the only reason any of us walked off." "I know that," I said gently. "You know that. The 11 men I brought home know that. But you know who writes history, Tom? Not the people who were there. The people with the rank." I told them the rest the way you'd pull a splinter, fast, because slow is worse. There was an investigation, the kind where the outcome is decided before the first question. I had 11 men ready to testify for me, and most of them tried. But Vance had connections that went way up, the kind of connections that can make 11 sworn statements turn into, well, those men are obviously loyal to the airman who saved them. Of course they'd defend her. My word against a colonel's, and a colonel who was very good at sounding reasonable in a quiet room. They didn't court-martial me. That would have been too loud, made too much of a record. They did something quieter. They let me know, in the careful way these things are done, that my career was over. That if I made noise, the noise would land on the 11 men who'd stood up for me. That the kindest thing I could do for everyone was to go away quiet. So I went away quiet. They gave me a discharge that looked clean enough on paper if you didn't read the lines under the lines. They sealed the details. And the official story, the one in the file, the one that would follow me anywhere I ever tried to use my service for anything, said I was the woman who got people killed. And the thing is, I said, after a while, when enough people in uniforms you respect look at you like you're the reason good men died, part of you starts to believe it, even when you know better, especially in the dark, especially at 3 in the morning. I told them about the years after. I hadn't planned to, but they were sitting so still and so kind that it came out anyway. How I couldn't sleep. How for the longest time a helicopter going over the house would put me flat on the floor before I even knew I'd moved. How my husband Mark was a good and patient man who held on a lot longer than most would have, and how I shut him out anyway, one closed door at a time, until there wasn't enough of me left in the house for him to stay married to. How the divorce was the politest, saddest thing, two people who still cared about each other signing papers because one of them had gone somewhere the other couldn't follow. He said something to me, at the end, I told them. He said, I think the war kept more of you than I ever got to. And he wasn't being cruel, he was just right. Brenda was crying, not making a show of it, just tears running down while she held my hand. So I came out here, I said, bought the little place past Maryville, bees, garden, dogs, and I made myself into exactly what you all thought I was, the strange, quiet aunt who did something forgettable in the service. Because the small story didn't hurt, the true one did. Kurt cleared his throat. He'd been quiet a long time. When he spoke, his voice didn't have any of the bluster left in it. All these years, he said, I thought you stayed away from us because you thought you were better than us, the fancy military lady who didn't have time for family. I know, I said, and the whole time you were just... He stopped, tried again. You were hiding. That's about the size of it. He looked down at his beer like it had personally let him down. I've been making jokes about you at these things for 20 years, he said, to your face and behind your back, about how you probably typed reports for the real soldiers. You didn't know. That's no kind of excuse, Di. And for the first time in my whole life, I watched my cousin Kurt mean something all the way down. It should have ended there. A hard, healing day. The truth out on the table at last, my family looking at me with new eyes, the long quiet finally over. But Tom Garrett wasn't done. He'd gone quiet while I talked, and when I finished he sat there a long moment, working his jaw. Then he said, careful, like he was setting something heavy down on a table that might not hold it. Di, you said his name was Vance, Colonel Gerald Vance. Yeah. He's not a colonel anymore. Something cold went down the back of my neck. What is he? Tom looked at me, and I think part of him wished he didn't have to say it. He's a congressman, he said, has been for years. And word is he's about to run for the Senate. He paused. And the reason I know that, the reason it's fresh in my head, is that next Saturday he's getting inducted into the Tennessee Military Hall of Honor. Big gala up in Nashville. They're giving him a medal for, and I'm quoting the flyer, a lifetime of leadership and selfless service to those under his command. The deck was silent. He's getting an award, I said slowly, for taking care of his men. Yes. The man who left his men on a mountain. Yes, Tom said, that man. 1 week from today, an hour and a half up the road from here. I didn't sleep much that week. It wasn't fear. At my age, fear has changed shape on me. When you're young, you're scared of getting hurt, of failing, of looking like a fool. When you get old, you mostly get scared of your own memory, of the rooms inside your head you've kept the doors shut on. And here was Gerald Vance, after 20 years of being a closed door, standing an hour and a half up the highway, about to be handed a medal for the worst lie ever told about me. I sat on my back porch most nights that week, listening to the bees settling and the dark coming down over the mountains, and I argued with myself. Tom called Wednesday. You going? He asked. No. Di. I've spent 20 years staying out of rooms with men like Gerald Vance in them, I said. I'm good at it. It's the one thing I'm good at. He was quiet a second. You know what you're really telling me? He said. You're telling me you'd rather keep the quiet than have the truth. And I get it, I do. The quiet's safe. But I buried 2 of the men from that mountain, Di, and I held the third one's hand in a hospital in Germany while they took his leg. And that man is going to be sitting in a chair somewhere next Saturday, seeing on the news that the colonel who quit on us is getting a medal for loving us. You want me to tell him you decided the quiet was more important than that? I didn't have an answer for him. Just come, Tom said. You don't have to do a thing. You don't have to say a word. Just be in the room. Sometimes that's the whole job. Just be a light in the room and let people find their own way to it. He hung up before I could argue, which was smart of him. I told myself I wasn't going, right up until the moment I was standing in my closet, pulling out the one good dark dress I own, the one I keep for funerals. The gala was at a big convention hotel on the river in Nashville. Valet parking, men in suits that cost more than my truck, women in dresses that shimmered when they moved. American flags everywhere, the smell of cut flowers and expensive cologne and warm bread. The kind of room where people honor sacrifice while sipping wine, where the worst thing anybody's afraid of is the fish being dry. Tom met me by the doors in an actual suit, looking 10 years younger for it. He took one look at my face. You came, he said. Jury's still out on whether that was smart. You look like you're about to commit a crime. I'm weighing it, I said, and that got a real laugh out of him. And then I saw Vance, and 20 years folded up like a road map and put me right back on that mountain. He was across the ballroom, near the stage, surrounded. Silver hair now, perfectly cut. A little heavier than I remembered, but it sat well on him, the way weight sits well on powerful men. He had that easy, generous laugh going, the one that makes everyone around you feel chosen. People kept reaching out to shake his hand. A young woman with a campaign pin hovered at his shoulder. A photographer drifted around the edges. He wore confidence like one more medal on the chest. He looked exactly like a man America trusts on sight. That's what bothered me most. That's what's always bothered me. The lie had aged into a fine, distinguished, electable thing. Then his eyes moved across the room and found me. I watched it happen. I watched the laugh stay on his face a half-second after the rest of him had already gone cold. He knew me. 20 years in a funeral dress, and he knew me instantly. And underneath all that practiced ease, just for a flicker, there it was. Fear. He excused himself from his little crowd and came across the floor toward us, smooth, unhurried, a man who decided to control a problem by walking straight at it. Tom shifted his weight beside me. Old habits. Vance stopped a polite few feet away. Diane Coleman, he said, warm, pleasant, like we were old friends. My word, it's been a long time. His voice was exactly the same. That rattled me more than anything else could have. 20 years, and that calm, reasonable, killing voice hadn't changed a note. Congressman, I said. His eyes did a careful pass over me, reading me the way he'd always read a room. You look well, he said. I'd heard you'd settled somewhere out in the country. Bees, was it? Just enough of a smile to let me know he kept track, that he could still reach me if he wanted to. You've done your homework, I said. I always do. The smile thinned. He glanced at Tom, dismissed him, came back to me. He lowered his voice so it was just for us. Diane, whatever you think you remember about a very chaotic night a very long time ago, I gently suggest that tonight is neither the time nor the place. No, I said. You made real sure of that 20 years ago. Time and place. You're good at those. The pleasant mask held, but something behind it tightened like a wire. People were starting to notice us, the little knot of stillness in a moving room. It would be a shame, Vance said softly, for either of us to make a scene over old ghosts. You've got a peaceful life. I'd hate to see anything disturb it. He let that sit. Then the public warmth flowed back over his face like water, and he stepped back, loud enough for the nearby crowd now. It's wonderful to see you, Diane. Truly. Enjoy your evening. And he walked away, back to his admirers, leaving the threat hanging in the air behind him, as neat as a coat on a hook. Tom let out a long breath through his nose. I hate that man, he said conversationally, more than I have ever hated anything. Get in line, I said. We took seats near the back. I won't pretend I wasn't thinking about leaving. Pride is an ugly, useful thing. It was pride that kept me planted in that chair as much as anything noble. I was just done being made small, even by a congressman. The lights came down, the program began. There were speeches about service and sacrifice, a color guard, a prayer. And then they brought up Gerald Vance, and the whole room rose to its feet before he'd said a word. I stayed in my seat. Tom stayed in his. Vance was good. I'll give the devil that. He talked about leadership like he'd invented it. He talked about the weight of command, about the impossible choices a commander makes, about how the men you lead become your sons. He had the room in his hand. Of course he did. He'd always known exactly what people wanted to hear, especially the older folks who fill those rooms, the ones raised to stand up when a uniform walks by. And then his eyes found me in the back again, and I watched him decide to do something stupid, the way men like him always eventually do, because they cannot leave a thing alone once it's frightened them. You know, he said, easy, conversational. Leadership also means accepting that not everyone who serves comes home whole. War damages people. Some carry that damage for the rest of their lives. Some never quite find their footing again, and they build their whole identity around a single bad night, and the version they remember gets a little grander every year. A soft, sad, generous smile. We have to have compassion for those people. We owe them that. But we can't always let their version of the truth be the one that goes in the history books. He was looking right at me when he said it. The whole back of the room could feel it. He was burying me again, right there, in real time, in the most charming voice in Tennessee. And the worst part was that everyone in that ballroom heard it as kindness. Something that had been asleep in me for 20 years opened one eye. Tom Garrett stood up. He didn't shout. He just stood, slow and creaking, at his table near the back, an old man in a borrowed suit, and the chair scraped loud in the quiet. I was there, Tom said. The room turned. Vance's smile held, but I saw his hand tighten on the podium. I'm sorry, he said smoothly. Sir, this is— I was on that mountain, Tom said, louder now, his voice carrying farther than I'd have thought it could. Spring of 2006, the night you're real careful not to name. I was up there when you pulled the planes off us and told us to hold and die. He turned a slow half-circle so the whole room could see him. And the only reason I'm standing in this fancy room tonight, instead of rotting in a hole in those mountains, is the airmen you just called damaged, sitting right there. Heads swung toward me, hundreds of them. Vance's voice came out sharp now, the charm cracking. This man is clearly confused, and I won't have a veterans' evening hijacked by— I'm not confused. A new voice. From down front, a man was getting to his feet near the stage. Younger than Tom, maybe 50, in a sport coat, and as he stood you could see he stood crooked, one trouser leg pinned up at the knee. He leaned on a cane. Sergeant Maddox, pardon, I'm— He shook his head, gathering himself, his voice shaking. My name is Reyes. I was the medevac patient that night, the one she walked off the mountain. I lost the leg, but I kept the rest of me, and I've got a wife and 2 girls because of the voice on that radio. He looked at Vance, and his whole face was twisted with something that had been waiting 20 years to come out. You weren't on that mountain, Congressman. She was. The room had gone from a ballroom to something else, something with weight. Then another man stood, older, a folded VFW cap in his hands. My boy was up there, he said, and his voice broke clean in half. My boy came home. He told me about Lighthouse before he ever told me about anything else. He's gone now, took his own life 2 years back. The war finally caught him. He had to stop. The whole room waited. But he had 11 more years than he should have had, and I got to know my son for 11 more years, because of her. Another stood, then another. A man who said he'd been the gun-run pilot, who said he'd flown blind that night and trusted nothing but a voice. A nurse who'd been at the field hospital. One by one, all through that ballroom, people I'd thought were strangers, people whose lives had brushed that one night, stood up out of their seats. and every one of them was looking at me. Vance stood at the podium with his mouth slightly open and his medal half pinned to his chest, and for the first time in 20 years, the most powerful man in any room he ever walked into looked exactly his size, which was small. The man who'd called him out first, Tom, my Tom, turned back to the stage. "The records on that operation got declassified 2 years ago," he said. "Most folks never went looking, but they're there. Anybody who wants to read what really happened on that mountain, it's all there in black and white now, including whose order it was to leave us." He let that land. "You might want to read it before you take that medal home, Congressman." Nobody clapped. Nobody booed. It was worse than either. It was the silence of several hundred people quietly revising what they'd believed about a man they'd been about to honor. And then Reyes, the man on the cane, the man with one leg, drew himself up as straight as a man on one leg can, raised a shaking hand to his forehead, and held it there. He saluted me across that whole crowded room. And one by one, all around me, the standing veterans did the same. I sat in my funeral dress with my hands in my lap, while 20 buried years rose up out of the floor of that ballroom like smoke finding the light. And I want to tell you that in that moment I felt triumphant. I want to tell you it felt like the movies. It didn't. It felt like grief finally getting somewhere to go. The gala never really came back from that. They tried. The MC got up and said some words and tried to move things along to dinner. Vance even managed to finish his speech, but the room had turned, and he could feel it. Older folks in this part of the world are raised polite, so nobody threw anything, nobody shouted him down, they just stopped meaning their applause. And a man like Vance lives entirely on people meaning it. Once the room stopped, you could watch the air go out of him in real time. I heard later that the Hall of Honor quietly postponed his induction pending a review. That's how those things die, not with a verdict, with a postponement that never gets rescheduled. His Senate run dried up over the following months, the way a creek dries up, so slow you can't say exactly when it stopped running. He didn't get arrested. There was no perp walk. Men like Vance almost never get the ending the rest of us would write for them. He just got smaller. Until the people who'd been planning to write his name dropped him for someone with a cleaner one. In the end, that's the only justice the world reliably hands out. It doesn't punish men like him, it just stops needing them. Tom and I went outside into the warm Nashville night after. The river smelled like mud and diesel. Traffic hummed on the bridge. He lit a cigarette he absolutely was not supposed to have, and I didn't say a word about it. "That's gonna spread," he said. "Fast. The community doesn't forget a name like yours, Di. By tomorrow night, every old operator in 3 states is gonna know Lighthouse turned up at a gala in Nashville." "I spent 20 years making sure they'd never know where I was," I said. He grinned around the cigarette. "And one cookout undid the whole thing." I laughed. A real one. The first all-the-way laugh I'd had in longer than I could remember. He got serious then, looking out at the dark water. "You deserved better than what they did to you," he said. "I needed you to hear me say that, out loud, where you couldn't pretend you didn't." I leaned on the railing next to him. 20 years ago, hearing that would have meant the world. But age does something funny to fairness. At some point, you stop expecting life to balance the books. You realize it mostly never does, and the people who wait around for it to are the ones who turn bitter. "You want to know the thing I regret most?" I said. "What's that?" "Not the career, not even Vance, really. I watched the lights on the water. I let it make me into a hermit. I let one liar in a uniform take my whole family off me on top of everything else. I had a brother an hour up the road this whole time, and I saw him at funerals." Tom didn't say anything for a while. He didn't have to. SEALs and combat controllers were all the same animal underneath. Nobody shuts the world out like men who used to run toward gunfire. You build a whole life around not being reachable, and somewhere down the line that habit stops feeling like a wound and starts feeling like who you are. By the next morning he was right. It had spread. My phone, which on a normal week rings about twice, did not stop. Old pilots. A retired pararescueman who I'd worked with in 2 countries, a SEAL Master Chief I hadn't talked to since before my discharge, who called and didn't say anything for a good 10 seconds, and then said, in a wrecked voice, "We never believed it. Not one of us ever believed the file. I need you to know we never believed it." And then he had to hang up. That one took the legs out from under me. Because down in the deepest part of myself, in the 3 in the morning part, I think I'd always halfway believed I really had been abandoned by everybody. That if they all looked at the file long enough, they'd decide it was true. Turns out the file and the truth had been 2 different things in a lot of people's hearts for 20 years. Turns out silence isn't the same thing as agreement. I just couldn't tell the difference from inside the quiet. Around noon, Kurt's truck came up my gravel drive. I was out at the hives in my veil when I saw it. He climbed out holding a foil pan, and he stood there at the edge of the yard like a man who wasn't sure he was allowed to come closer. I pulled off the veil. "What have you got, Kurt?" "Brenda made a chess pie." He held it up like evidence. I told her I'd run it down, but really He stopped, looked at his boots. "I wanted to come say something to your face." We sat at my kitchen table. The ceiling fan turned. 2 dogs lay across his feet, deciding he was acceptable. He pushed the pie around in front of him and didn't eat any of it. "I've been an ass to you my whole life," he said finally. "I wouldn't say your whole life, D," he looked at me. 20 years of jokes, at family stuff, about you being stuck up, about you being a paper pusher who thought she was a soldier." His jaw worked. "I made you a punchline because it was easier than wondering why you really stayed away. And the actual reason was that some son of a—" He caught himself, glanced at my dogs like they were children. "Some coward in a uniform broke something in you, and then made the world call you a liar for it. And you carried that alone for 20 years, while I made jokes." "You didn't know," I said again. "You keep saying that." He shook his head. "And you keep letting me off too easy. That's the part that's killing me, D. You're the one who got wronged, and you're sitting here making me feel better about it." He scrubbed a hand over his face. "How'd he live with it? Vance, how does a man do that to somebody and then go get a medal for it and sleep fine at night?" I thought about that a while. About the calm in Vance's voice. The way he'd repackaged abandoning his men as the hard wisdom of leadership. "Same way the rest of us live with hard things, I expect," I said, "by telling himself a story where he's not the bad guy. He probably doesn't even think he lied. He thinks he made a tough call and history was unfair to him. People can talk themselves into about anything if the alternative is admitting they're a coward." Kurt was quiet. Then he reached across the table, this big, loud man, and put his hand over mine, the way Brenda had at the cookout. "You're coming to Thanksgiving," he said. It wasn't a question. "And Christmas, and every dumb cookout. You're done being the ghost story, Di. I'm not having it." I laughed, but my eyes were stinging. "Okay, Kurt. I mean it. I know you do." A few weeks later, Tom asked me to come to a thing in Knoxville. A little room above a coffee shop, folding chairs, bad coffee in a big silver urn, where veterans came on Thursday nights to sit with each other so they didn't have to sit alone. Young ones just back from over there, old ones from wars before mine, a couple who didn't talk at all the whole night, and I knew that quiet on sight. It has a sound, and the sound is nothing. For 20 years I'd have driven 100 miles out of my way to avoid a room like that. Too many ghosts in one place. But something in me had come loose at that gala, some old lock I'd thought was rusted shut, and I found I didn't want to run from the ghosts anymore. I was tired of running, tired in a way that finally felt like it could end. Tom introduced me plain. "This is Di. No medals, no story, no mountain, just Di." And I could have hugged him for it. Toward the end, he asked if I'd say something. I almost didn't. Then I looked over and saw a young man by the wall, maybe 25, staring down at the floor with his hands hanging between his knees, sitting exactly the way I used to sit at 3 in the morning for about 10 years. And I stood up. "Everybody hears about war, and they think the hard part is the war," I said. The shooting, the being scared, and that part's bad, sure, but for a whole lot of us, that's not the part that gets you. A few of the older ones nodded. The part that gets you is after, I said. You come home, and everybody needs you to be fine, right now, today, so they can stop worrying. And you can't. The clock in your head runs at a different speed now. The world that used to feel safe doesn't anymore, and you can't explain why, and after a while you quit trying. The young man by the wall looked up. For 20 years, I said, I thought being alone was strength. I thought if I just shut the door on everybody, nothing else could get in and hurt me. And it works, kind of. That's the trap. It works just enough that you keep doing it. Until one day you look up, and you're 56 years old, and your family thinks you're a stranger, and you genuinely cannot remember the last time somebody touched you on purpose. The room was very still. Don't do the 20 years, I said to him, to all of them. I did the 20 years so you wouldn't have to. They're not worth what they cost. After, the young man by the wall came up to me at the coffee urn. He didn't look much past 25 up close. His hands were shaking a little. You really think a person can come back from it? He asked. Quiet, like he was afraid of the answer either way. From what, exactly? I said. Not to be difficult, because the answer depends on the question. From the dark part. He couldn't quite look at me. The part where you don't think you should still be here. I took my time with that one. He deserved a true answer, not a comfortable one. Not all the way, I said finally. I won't lie to you. Some of it doesn't leave. You don't get back to who you were before. That person's gone, and you can grieve him. That's allowed. He flinched, and then he nodded, slow, because nobody had ever told him the grieving was allowed. But all the way back isn't the question, I said. The question is whether you can get back far enough to live. And the answer to that one is yes. I'm standing here. It took me 20 years longer than it should have, because I was too stubborn to let anybody help. But I'm standing here. So can you. Faster than me if you're smart, and you let these people in this room do it with you. His eyes went wet. He nodded, hard, the way men do when they're not going to let themselves cry in front of other men. Okay, he said. Okay. And I'm telling you, that one word from that one scared kid meant more to me than any medal they ever forgot to give me. I drove home that night under a sky full of stars, the windows down, the cool coming off the mountains. And for the first time in longer than I can remember, the quiet in that truck didn't feel like a thing I was hiding inside. It just felt like peace. I thought about all of them on the way home. Tom, who'd refused to let me stay buried. Dale and Brenda, and even loud, foolish, good-hearted Kurt, who'd shown up with a chess pie and 20 years of sorry. Reyes on his cane. The father who got 11 more years with his son. Even Vance, in his way, alone now in whatever quiet house his lie finally bought him. We'd all been broken by the same world, just in different directions. Some of us went arrogant. Some of us went guilty. Some of us, like me, just went away. But underneath all of it, every single one of us had only ever been trying to survive ourselves. People always assumed the worst about my call sign. When they finally heard it, the strangers always asked if lighthouse meant something cold, something far off and lonely up on a rock. But that's not what a lighthouse is. A lighthouse doesn't go out to save you. It can't. It doesn't chase the ships, and it doesn't leave its post. It just stays exactly where it is, in the worst weather, on the worst night, and it refuses to go dark. So that anyone lost out there in the storm has one true thing to steer by, so they can find their own way home. For 20 years I forgot that the light was supposed to be for me too. Maybe you've got somebody in your family who went quiet a long time ago, and you all decided on a story about why. Maybe the story's wrong. Maybe they're not stuck up or strange or cold. Maybe they're just out on a rock somewhere in bad weather, keeping a light lit, waiting for someone to notice it's still on. If this story reminded you of someone, of a person you lost touch with, a person you misjudged, or even a part of yourself you've kept in the dark too long, Then I hope you'll do something about it before another 20 years goes by. Make the call, drive the hour, bring the pie. And if you're the one out on the rock tonight, the one in the storm who's sure nobody's coming, I need you to hear the one thing it took me a whole life to learn. Refusing to go dark is the bravest thing a person can do, and you don't have to do it alone.